Gather round, children, no longer have to wait. There'll be fun and adventure all at story time with Cait. A world of imagination is there for you to take. All you gotta do is listen. It's story time with Cait. It's story time with Cait.
Hi, boys and girls. Welcome to Storytime with Cait. That's me. I'm here at Wells Reservation in Wells, Maine. I'm enjoying I know you guys can't see it, but just imagine this. I'm enjoying a beautiful view of this coastal marsh. I can smell the salty, fresh ocean air, which I love. And we are about to embark on the second part of the Heath Cousins and the Kingsgate Bridge by Eileen Hobbs. Now, let's get to reading. Okay. Chapter 4, The Treasure Chest. At first, they could see nothing because of the blackness. Addie turned to Bodie. "Quick, Bodie, the marble," she urged. But Bodie was ahead of her. "I'm already on it," he said, holding up the marble he had been given from their first visit to the Moonstone Cave. As before, the marble glowed like a flashlight, illuminating the small room around them. It was a very small cave with rounded stone walls. Jack's head almost touched the ceiling. The room was empty, except for a wooden treasure chest in the center. Maybe there's gold in there," Beanie said excitedly, leaning down next to the chest. He started to open it, but Addie cautioned him. "Wait, Beanie," she said. "Remember the sword?" Beanie nodded, thinking of the sword from their previous adventure that had burned his hand. "I'll do it," Jack said, kneeling in front of the chest. If anyone would get hurt, it would be him. He was the protector, after all. Slowly, he grasped the latch on the chest and lifted the lid. There was definitely no gold. Bodie held his glowing marble over the trunk to reveal its contents. Addie reached in and lifted out a red velvet floor-length cloak with a fur-lined hood. It looked to be her size. "I already have a coat," Addie said. "Am I supposed to wear this?" Her cousins only shrugged. The next item was an axe in a leather sleeve. "Darn," Jack said. "I was hoping for my sword back." Addie handed him the axe. She knew it wouldn't be safe for Bodie or Beanie to carry no matter how much they wanted to. She reached deep down inside the chest to see what else was in it. Her hand touched a small, smooth pouch with a drawstring closing. She lifted it out. "What is it?" Bodie asked curiously. Addie opened it and peered inside. "It looks like some seeds." She poured some out into the palm of her hand. "That's weird," Beanie said. "What is that for?" Of course, none of them knew the answer. It was all a big mystery. "Can I keep it?" Bodie asked. Addie handed Bodie the small pouch. It seemed harmless enough. "Anything else in there?" Jack asked. Addie leaned back over the chest again. The next item she brought out was a magnifying glass. The handle was gold and had a snake carved around it. "Cool," Beanie said. "Can I have that?" Addie shrugged and handed it to Beanie. Addie leaned over the chest again, rubbing her hand across the rough wooden bottom. "I think that's it," she started to say, and then exclaimed, "Wait, there's a piece of paper, and something shiny next to it." Addie pulled out a crinkled paper that looked yellowed and worn. Along with it was a beautiful gold necklace with a bright turquoise stone. Addie's hands began to shake as she examined the necklace. "It's Gemma's," she whispered. "How do you know?" Jack asked. "I remember her wearing it when we first met her in the garden, but it wasn't around her neck. It was around her forehead like a crown." She turned to look at her cousins. Their pale faces shone like ghosts in the light of Bodie's marble. "This is not a good sign," Addie said. "She must be in real danger." "Read what's on the paper," Jack urged. There was a dark ink script on it. It was covered in smudges, as if the author had shed a tear while writing it. "What does it say?" all her cousins asked at once. The writing was in Latin, but none of them were surprised. All their previous instructions had been in the same language, and only Addie, with the help of her moonstone ring, could read it. Her ring began to glow as she started to decipher the writing, but before she did, she skipped to the bottom of the page to see who the author was. There, a hurried signature read, "Gemma." "It's from Gemma," Addie exclaimed. "Hang on." She began to read the letter, slowly at first, as the Latin words changed into English before her very eyes. "Dear Wanderers," she read, "I write this letter in great haste." "What's haste?" Bodie asked. Beanie punched him lightly in the arm. It means in a hurry, silly, he said. I didn't know, Bodhi fired back, frowning at his older brother. Stop it, Jack said. There's no time for fighting. Go ahead, Addie. Addie continued. As I write, my garden is being destroyed. Jumani has been taken from my side, and I know now I am next. Remember these words, wanderers. Then Addie read what sounded like a riddle from Gemma's letter. The jewel of the garden is gone. To find her, remember this song. What seems to be right may be wrong. The jewel may appear, but test that she's real. One stone is pearl white, the other like night. Ignore the one who sings, but follow the sapphire wings. Where once the secret treasure lay, this is where you'll find the way. Now hurry to the garden door, or wanderers will be no more. Addie looked up at her cousins. They were all silent for a moment, taking in Gemma's words of warning. What does all that mean? Bodhi asked finally. I'm not sure, Addie said, but I think we need to find out. There's no door, Beanie said, looking around the small enclosure. How do we get to the garden from here? A rumbling noise startled all of them. It seemed to be coming from the stone walls of the cave. The dirt floor under them began to quake. It's an earthquake! Beanie exclaimed. Look, Jack said, the walls are moving toward us. He was right. The room was getting smaller and smaller as they watched. It wouldn't be long before the walls would close in around them and crush them. What do we do, Addie? Bodhi asked. His voice trembled. Addie knew he was fighting back tears. Her heart was also pounding. She looked at Gemma's letter again, searching for clues to a way to escape the suffocating walls. Addie, Jack said, trying to control his fear as well. I can touch both sides of the cave. What should we do? Addie looked up and saw that Jack's long arms were outstretched and his palms were flat against both sides of the wall. The door where they had entered the small room had disappeared. Where once the secret treasure lay, Addie read again. The treasure! I think she means the treasure chest. She leaned over the treasure chest once again and felt the bottom of it. Her hands touched a metal handle that had not been there before. She pulled on it, but it did not budge. Jack, she yelled, see if you can pull this up. The sound of the moving rock walls was getting closer and closer. Jack reached past her and tugged on the metal ring. It began to lift up slowly. Bodhi, let me see your marble. Bodhi shone his light over Jack's shoulder. There are stairs, Jack yelled. Quick, get in. He helped Bodhi into the chest first. Go on down the stairs, Bodhi. We're right behind you. Beanie descended next. Addie quickly stuffed the cloak, Gemma's letter, and Gemma's amulet into the backpack and followed Beanie down the shaky wooden steps. She looked back to make sure Jack was behind her. He had taken his first steps down the stairs when they heard a loud crunching noise. The walls closed in on the treasure chest above them, and it began to splinter into pieces. Jack quickly closed the trapdoor just as the chest disintegrated above them. They stood in silence at the bottom of the stairs, breathing hard. Their faces glowed pale white in the light of Bodhi's marble. They looked around to see where they were. It was another small cavern. In front of them was another door, arched at the top and made of iron. Let's get out of here, Jack said. Beanie took out his key and inserted it in the rusty metal lock. It turned and they pushed it open. Bright sunlight greeted them, and they hurried out, anxious to be out of the dark cave with the deathly walls. We're back, Bodhi yelled with excitement. We're back in the garden. Bodhi was right. The familiar walls of a garden rose up around them. They had returned to the garden where they had first met Gemma and Jumani last summer. They were back. Their joy and excitement quickly turned to dismay, however. While the sun shone brightly and it was very warm, everything looked different. Where once luscious pink, purple, and white flowers bloomed and emerald-colored ivy trailed over the stone walls, there were only brown, dried leaves and dead stalks. Some of the plants even looked as if a fire had swept through, leaving black, ugly sticks in their place. There were no flowers, no heavenly scents of honeysuckle like before. There was no life at all. Oh no, Addie whispered. What happened? Chapter 5. The Gardener. The cousins stepped forward slowly, looking for anything that might be familiar. Around the wall, they could see 2 of the 5 doors that circled the garden wall. What do we do now? Beanie asked. Addie had no idea. I hear something, Bodhi said suddenly. They all stopped to listen. Sure enough, a soft scritch, scritch could be heard in the distance. We might as well see what it is, Jack said. They began to walk toward the sound. They walked past the huge, gnarled tree where they had first met Gemma and Jumani. Surprisingly, it still had its bright green leaves. Whatever happened didn't affect Gemma's tree, Jack said. The scritch-scritch sound became a little louder. Then, in the distance, a strange figure came into view. It was an old man. He wore loose-fitting pants and a loose-fitting shirt, and he was bent over a plot of dirt. He had a hoe in his hands, and he was digging in the dry, barren ground. His digging was the source of the strange sounds they heard. "Hello?" Addie called out. The old man slowly looked up. His face was like brown leather, and he had a white beard that fell to his chest and a thatch of messy white hair. His eyes were a startling deep blue, but they were the saddest eyes Addie had ever seen. The old man stopped his hoeing and stared at them. "Who are you?" he asked. "We're friends of Gemma," Addie explained. "Do you know where she is? And what happened to the garden?" "So you don't know," the man said sadly. "Come on then," he said, laying his hoe down gently. "Let's go over here." They followed the man back toward the ancient gnarled tree. He picked up a small leather flask and took a sip of water, wiping the sweat from his face. Addie and her cousins were also getting hot, even under the shade of the enormous tree. The temperature was like summer here. They began to shed their coats, gloves, and hats to cool off. "What's your name?" Jack asked, sitting on one of the roots of the gnarled tree. The others found similar seats. "I'm Almas," the man said. "I'm the gardener. Unfortunately, there isn't anything to garden anymore," he said sadly. "It's been like this for several years, ever since Gemma and Jumani were taken away." "Several years?" Addie couldn't believe it. It had only been 6 months of their own time since they had been here. "Taken away?" she asked, alarmed. "Who took them away?" "Dayu," he said mysteriously, "the Dark One. She began to gain too much power. She ruled out there, outside the garden, for a long time. But she got greedy. She wanted the garden, too. She wanted to stop the Wanderers from coming in. She wanted Gemma's gifts. But as long as Gemma was here, the garden was safe. So she found a way to take Gemma and the wolf." The cousins sat staring intently at the old man. They couldn't believe it. Gemma and Jumani had been captured. "I think," Addie said, "that we're here to help somehow. We found this letter from Gemma." She handed the letter from the treasure chest to him. He took it and glanced over it. "So," he smiled for the first time, "you are the Wanderers that Gemma talked so fondly about. I am glad to see you. I hope you can help get them back. But Dayu is very powerful, and she takes many forms. When she came here, she took the form of a young Wanderer. She took Gemma and Jumani by surprise. Once she arrived, she revealed her true self, and by then it was too late." "She came through a door, like we did?" Bodhi asked, frightened. The gardener nodded. "Yes, I wasn't here. I don't know how she got in. But when I came the next day, they were gone in the garden." He motioned around him wearily. "Well, it was like this. You were the first Wanderers I have seen since then." "What about the tree?" Bodhi asked, motioning to the rustling leaves above their heads. "Why is it still alive?" Almas smiled gently. "It's been here a long time," he said. "Its roots are very deep." The cousins all thought about this a moment. Then Jack asked, "Can you help us? Do you know where Dayu took them?" Almas shook his head sadly. "I have only heard rumors that Dayu has a fort in the Lapis Mountains. It overlooks the ocean. It is near a large black marble statue that is carved in the shape of a wolf." They all straightened when Almas mentioned the statue of the wolf. Jack leaned forward, closer to Almas. "You said that Dayu can take different forms? Does she ever take the form of a gray wolf?" "Jack," Addie said, placing a hand in her cousin's arm. "Are you thinking of the gray wolf? The one you fought last time you were here?" But Jack was waiting for Almas to answer. The old man nodded slowly. "She often appears as a wolf, or other menacing creatures. She even appears as beautiful creatures at times, until she reveals her true self." Beanie and Bodhi's eyes widened. "Oh no," Beanie said, looking at Jack. "That means we may have already met Dayu. We just didn't know it." Jack nodded. "Go on, Almas. Can you tell us anything else?" Almas shook his shaggy head. "I'm sorry. I wish I could help more." The cousins were silent, thinking about the old gardener's words. It all sounded very dangerous. How could just the four of them face such a frightening and powerful enemy? "Well," Addie said, looking at her cousins, "what do you think? I know it's scary, but we're here and Gemma needs our help. Should we go for it?" Bodhi and Beanie slowly nodded their heads. "As long as we don't miss Christmas," Bodhi exclaimed. Addie and Jack couldn't help but laugh. Only Bodhi, in the middle of a dangerous situation, would think of Christmas. "Okay then," Addie stood up. Should we go out the same door as last time? She asked Almas. I'm sorry, he said. I don't know. That was always Gemma's job. I think we should, Jack said. At least we already know what lies behind that door. It's a good starting place. Be safe, Almas said. I wish I could go with you, but I wouldn't last out there. My place is here. Thank you, Eddie said. I hope you get your garden back. Almas nodded sadly. The cousins started to turn away, but Almas called them back. Take your coats, he warned. It's warm and sunny here, but I don't know what it's like out there now. His words chilled all of them. Addie grabbed their coats, hats, and gloves and stuffed them in the backpack. They headed down the familiar stone path that branched out to each of the 5 doors. They were all quiet, thinking of the dangers that might lie ahead of them. Are you sure about this? Bodhi asked, his voice trembling. No, Addie said. I'm sorry, Bodhi. I'm not sure about this. But I feel it's the right choice to help Gemma. Bodhi nodded reluctantly. Well, it is the garden of choice after all, Beanie piped up, trying to lighten the mood. In spite of their feelings of impending doom, they all laughed at his joke. That's right, Jack said. Let's just hope we make the right one. Chapter 6, The Thorn Trees. The cousins found the familiar door easily. They recognized it from their last visit to the garden. It was plainer than the other doors, with faint handprints on the wooden front. 2 old trees framed the door like tired ancient soldiers. This time, however, the trees were brown and lifeless. Ready? Addie asked. The boys all nodded and placed their hands in the appropriate handprint. Bodhi's was the smallest, and Jack's was the largest print. Together they pushed, and the door began to creak open. Like last time, it was night on the other side of the door, and the same dark path led away from the comfort of the sunny garden. I know, Bodhi said fearlessly. I'll lead the way with my marble. Jack ruffled his brother's hair as he went by. Thanks, Bodhi. The cousins stepped out onto the dirt path that led into the dark forest. As before, row after row of dark, shadowy tree limbs lined the path. This time, however, the limbs seemed even blacker and ghostlier than before. That's weird, Bodhi said, holding his marble up to light the way. He stepped closer to one of the trees and examined it closely. I don't remember these on the trees, he said. Jack, Addie, and Beanie stepped up behind Bodhi. He was right. Every tree had dark thorns the size of a tiger's fang growing out of its trunk. You're right, Addie said. It's like they have a disease or were cursed or something. Before she could stop him, Bodhi reached up and touched one of the needle-like points. Ouch, he cried, quickly bringing his finger to his lips. It bit me. Addie grabbed Bodhi's hand to examine his wound. Blood was flowing from it steadily. Here, Beanie said, taking off his necklace. He wore the healing stone that Gemma had given him, and in the past it had healed his own hand when it was burned. Addie laid the strawberry-sized stone on Bodhi's finger. Immediately it stopped bleeding. Yay, Bodhi said. It worked. Guys, Beanie said, putting his necklace back around his neck. I think we're in trouble. He pointed at the tree of thorns. They're growing. Beanie was right. The thorns on the trees were getting bigger, reaching out toward them like menacing fingers. They all stepped away from the growing spikes, only to be thrust against similar thorns growing out of the trees on the other side. We'll be trapped, Addie said. Let's go. They began to run. Thorns were also growing in front of them on the path. Soon they wouldn't be able to get through. The thorns would spread across the path and pierce all of them. Addie looked at Jack. His face was as frightened as hers, but they had the same thought. The axe, they said together. Jack took his backpack off and quickly searched around for the axe from the treasure chest. Hurry, Bodhi cried tearfully. They're almost touching us. Jack grabbed the axe and began hacking at the thorns in front of them. Keep behind me, he ordered. They moved forward slowly, Jack whacking and chopping away at the thorns, clearing a safe path for the cousins to follow. Ow! He heard Addie yell, but he didn't stop. He had to keep ahead of the growing thorns before they were all stabbed by them. That hurt, Bodhi yelled. One got my hand, Beanie cried. Jack ignored their cries. They had to keep going. Where was the end of these trees? Just as he wondered this, he saw a glimpse of the moon up ahead. Maybe it was a clearing. Come on, he said, slashing and swinging from left to right. He was happy to see that the axe Gemma had left them was sharp enough to slice through the thorns with one clean movement. At last, they stumbled through the last few feet of thorns into a small clearing. The path had disappeared. There were trees on either side, but they were at a greater distance, and they didn't seem to have thorns. They all collapsed onto the ground, breathing hard. Bodhi held his marble up and looked back at the path they had just been on. They couldn't see it at all. There was only a tangled mass of dark spikes that had grown together to form a dense, impenetrable wall. "One thing's for sure," Beanie said, breathing hard. "We're not going back that way." The cousins were silent, grateful to be safely away from the monstrous growing branches. "Jack," Addie said, "look at your hands." Jack looked at his hands, which still held the axe. They were covered in cuts and pricks from the thorns. Suddenly, he realized how painful they were. "What about the rest of you?" he asked. Beanie held up his hand, where he had also been punctured. A streak of blood trickled down from the wound. "I'm okay," Bodhi said. "Just a small one on my leg." Jack turned to Addie. She was strangely quiet. Her face was like the pale, milky white color of her moonstone ring. "I think," she started to say, but she never finished. Suddenly, she slumped over to the ground. "Addie B!" Bodhi cried. Jack leaned over her. A red stain was spreading through her pale yellow shirt at her waist. Jack lifted the corner of her shirt and saw, to his horror, that the tip of one of the thorns was protruding from Addie's side. Addie began to moan softly. "Try my necklace," Bodhi said, handing it to Jack. "I have to get the thorn out first," Jack said. "Bodhi, hold your marble over here. Beanie, the magnifying glass." Beanie rummaged in the backpack until he found the magnifying glass they had found in the chest. "I'll hold it," he said. The boys bent over Addie, working together to gently pull the thorn from her side, but she jerked suddenly. "You have to hold still, Addie," Jack commanded. He wasn't sure she heard him, but she did calm down. With the magnifying glass held over the wound, Jack was able to grasp the edge of the thorn and pull it out quickly. It was the size of a wolf's fang. Addie began to cry. "We got it, Addie B," Bodhi said to her bravely, gently rubbing her arm. "You'll be okay." "Now try your necklace, Beanie," Jack said. Beanie laid the healing stone across Addie's side. They all stared at it, expecting it to heal up right away, just as Bodhi's finger had. But nothing happened. "It's not working," Beanie said dismally. "What now?" Jack went through the backpack and pulled out his long-sleeved shirt. He wrapped it around Addie's waist and tied it tightly. "We'll rest here for a while," he said. "Hopefully that will stop the bleeding." "Will she be all right?" Bodhi asked. He was trying his best not to cry. "I hope so," Jack said. "Let's all get some rest." He pulled out their coats and balled them up to make pillows for each of them. Then he took the red velvet cloak and spread it over Addie's still form. Addie opened her eyes and smiled up at him. "I'll be okay, Jack," she said weakly. "I hope so, Queen Bee," he said hopefully. And then again to himself, "I truly hope so." I hope Addie B's okay. If you want to hear if Addie B's okay, make sure you tune in for part 3 of the Heath cousins and the Kingsgate Bridge, which will be our very next episode. And don't forget, kids, reading is fun. Thanks so much for watching Storytime with Cait. That's me.